Okay, so somewhere this week, a spreadsheet at Lionsgate hit a number that nobody in that building thought was realistic 2 years ago. $1 billion. Not projected, not on track for, actually crossed. And the movie that did it isn't a superhero movie. It isn't a sequel to anything. It's a 2.5-hour biopic about Michael Jackson. And I want to walk through why that number is actually one of the strangest box office stories of the decade, because the math behind it breaks almost every rule this genre normally follows. Let's start with the basic shape of the story, because the numbers alone tell you something is off. As of this past weekend, Michael sits at $1.001 billion worldwide. $371 million of that came from domestic theaters. $629 million came from overseas. And it crossed the line specifically because of Japan, a market that only just opened for the film and added $35 million almost by itself. Think about that for a second. A movie that's been out for 12 weekends, that's already been available to rent at home since June 9th, that hits physical media on shelves this week, is still pulling in enough fresh money from a single country to push it over a 10-figure milestone. That's not normal legs. That's a film that refused to slow down. Now here's where it gets genuinely interesting from a number standpoint. Before Michael, the record for a music biopic was Bohemian Rhapsody, which topped out at $911 million back in 2018. Michael didn't just beat that number, it lapped it by close to $100 million, and it did that in a genre where almost nothing else even comes close. Seriously, go check the list. Bohemian Rhapsody and Michael are the only two music biopics in history to cross $300 million worldwide. Every other one, Elvis, Rocketman, Straight Outta Compton, all respectable, all profitable, none of them within shouting distance of this tier. Then Michael did something even rarer. It didn't just beat the best music biopic ever made. It beat the best biopic, period, of any genre, including Oppenheimer, which pulled in $975.8 million in 2023 and was considered close to unbeatable for this category. A 3-hour Christopher Nolan film about nuclear physics and government hearings was the gold standard for biographical filmmaking at the box office. A film about a pop star's rise through the Jackson 5 just walked past it. So why did this happen? I think the honest answer is a mix of three things that rarely line up all at once. First, the marketing did something almost unheard of before the film even had a release date locked. Back in November 2025, a teaser trailer for this movie pulled in over 116 million views in a single day. That's not a typical box office indicator. Trailer views don't always translate to ticket sales, but that number told every studio executive involved that this wasn't a normal release. That's the kind of number you usually see for a Marvel movie or a long-awaited franchise entry, not for a 2-hour drama about a musician who's been dead since 2009. Second, the opening weekend blew past every forecast that existed for this genre. Early predictions in March had this movie opening somewhere between $52 and $65 million domestically. By late March, that forecast had jumped to $80 to $90 million. It ended up opening at $97 million domestically and $217 million globally, which absolutely shattered the previous benchmark for a musical biopic opening, held by Straight Outta Compton at $60 million back in 2015. That's not a small beat. That's more than 1.5 times the old record in a single weekend. Third, and this is the part that actually explains the long tail, word of mouth kept people coming back. Distributors have said audiences returned to see it multiple times, which is exactly the pattern you need if you want a film to survive 12 full weekends in theaters, get a home release, and still be adding tens of millions of dollars for markets that hadn't even opened yet. Now I have to bring up the part of this story that isn't in the press releases, because ignoring it would be dishonest. And honestly, it's the more interesting half of the conversation. This film has been controversial from the jump, specifically because of how it handles, or doesn't handle, the child sexual abuse allegations made against Michael Jackson during his life. Critics have been pointed and consistent on this. The film largely leaves that chapter out, focusing instead on his rise from the Jackson 5 to becoming a solo global icon, ending around the release of his first solo album in 1979. Some family members reportedly weren't thrilled either, with public friction reported between relatives who have financial stakes in the film's success and family members who felt the framing whitewashed serious allegations. And here's the thing that makes this genuinely worth sitting with instead of just skating past. A film can be a massive commercial success and still be a legitimately debated piece of work. Those two facts are not in conflict, and $1 billion in ticket sales doesn't settle the argument about whether the story being told is the whole story. It just tells you that a lot of people across a lot of countries wanted to see this particular version of it on a big screen. Worth remembering that box office numbers measure attendance and curiosity. They don't measure consensus, and they definitely don't measure moral judgment. Let's zoom out for a second, because this milestone gets even more interesting when you put it next to the rest of 2026 box office. Michael is only the second film this entire year to cross $1 billion, and the first one to get there was, and I promise I'm not making this up, an animated video game movie. Super Mario Galaxy crossed the same line just before Michael did. Toy Story 5 is sitting at around $879 million and is expected to be the third film this year to join that club. So picture that lineup for a second. A plumber, a cowboy doll, and Michael Jackson. That is genuinely the current billion-dollar club of 2026. And if you told me that combination a few years ago, I would not have believed you. For Lionsgate specifically, this is the biggest financial moment in the studio's history. Full stop. Their previous record holder was The Hunger Games, Catching Fire, back in 2013, which finished its run at $865 million. Michael didn't just beat that number. It beat it by more than $130 million, and it did it as a 2.5-hour drama with a reported production budget of around $155 million, which for context is a fraction of what most billion-dollar movies actually cost to make. That's an enormous return on investment, and it's exactly why Lionsgate's film chief has already confirmed a sequel is in active development, reportedly picking up where this one leaves off, likely covering the thriller era and everything that came after. So where does the genre go from here? That's actually the most interesting question hanging over this whole story. Because the uncomfortable truth is there might not be another artist alive or dead who can replicate this. Michael Jackson has a specific kind of name recognition that very few musicians share globally, the kind that get a trailer 116 million views before a single review exists. There's really only one other act with that same universal reach, and that's the Beatles. And there is a Beatles biopic in the works right now, except it's not one movie. It's 4 separate films, one focused on each member, all releasing on the same weekend. Which is a fascinating gamble, because collectively those 4 movies could absolutely add up to $1 billion or more between them. But splitting the story 4 ways almost guarantees no single film in that lineup will individually cross this same threshold. It's a completely different bet than the one Lionsgate made with Michael. So here's where I land on this. The box office number is real, and it's historic. First biopic ever to hit $1 billion. First billion-dollar movie in Lionsgate's entire history. Biggest music biopic ever by a wide margin. Those are just facts. But the more useful takeaway isn't the number itself. It's what the number reveals about audiences right now. People are still willing to show up in theaters multiple times for stories built around real cultural icons, even when the story being told is incomplete or contested. That tension between commercial success and critical controversy isn't going away. And if anything, this milestone is going to make more studios chase exactly this formula. Whether that's a good thing for the genre or a warning sign probably depends on which biopic gets made next and how honestly it chooses to tell its story. If you want to see how this plays out with the Beatles project, once we get actual details, that's probably going to be its own video, so stick around for that one. Let me know in the comments which real story you think deserves this kind of billion-dollar treatment next, and which one you think Hollywood would probably get wrong. I'll see you in the next one.